Snow fell so thick it swallowed sound itself. At the edge of the abandoned city, the enemy commanders stared at their rangefinder and laughed. 1-800 mem. Out of range, out of danger, out of every conceivable risk. They didn't know that on the top floor of a collapsed hotel, a woman was adjusting her breathing to match each frozen gust of wind. No radio, no team, just Snow heartbeat, and a rifle that had been waiting for this moment for years. When the shot rang out, winter had chosen its side. The city had died months ago. What remained were skeletal buildings, their windows blown out like empty eye sockets. Snow filled the streets where cars had burned down to their frames. The wind moved through it all with a sound like distant breathing. Captain Nathan Rivers pressed himself against a concrete wall, feeling the cold seep through 3 layers of tactical gear. His team was scattered across 2 buildings, pinned down by overlapping fields of fire. The enemy held the high ground. Every route out was covered. His radio crackled with static. Lost visual on the drone. Lieutenant Sarah Chen's voice came through tight with control. Jamming is widespread. We're blind. Nathan checked his tablet. The tactical display showed their position as a red cluster, surrounded by orange threat markers. They'd walked into a prepared kill zone. Professional work? The kind that suggested military training, not militia. Options, he asked. Sergeant Marcus Webb appeared beside him. Snow, already gathering on his shoulders. Known good. They've got overlapping sightlines from 3 positions. Heavy weapons. If we move, they'll cut us apart. Nathan studied the enemy positions through his scope. The main command post was established in what had been a municipal building, fortified, protected, and exactly 1-800 away, according to his laser rangefinder, completely safe. That distance put them beyond the effective range of anything his team carried. The enemy knew it. They were taking their time, methodical. In another hour, when darkness fell, they'd tighten the noose. Sir Webb's voice dropped. There's someone here says she was attached to our unit, but I don't have any record of where building C top floor. Nathan moved through the ruined structure, his team covering angles. The snow had gotten inside through collapsed walls, creating drifts against what remained of the furniture. He climbed stairs that groaned under his weight. Metal treads slick with ice. She was waiting on the 8th floor. Her gear was minimal. No rank insignia. No unit patch, just winter camouflage that looked hand-modified, worn in ways that spoke of long use rather than regulation issue. Her rifle lay beside her, a custom build he didn't recognize. The scope alone probably cost more than his entire loadout. Captain Rivers. She didn't salute, didn't stand, just acknowledged his presence with the barest nod. And you are attached to your unit as of 3 hours ago. Her voice was quiet, neutral, the kind of voice that had learned not to carry. Command thought you might need specialized support. Nathan looked at her rifle, then at the tactical situation on his tablet. We're pinned down by a prepared position 1-8 comm out. Unless you've got artillery in your pocket, I'm not sure what kind of support. I know the distance. She was already moving to the window, studying the terrain through binoculars that had seen better days. Municipal building, 3 stories, reinforced position. Command element visible on the roof. That's outside engagement range for most people. She lowered the binoculars. When does the wind shift? Nathan stared at her. What the wind? It's been coming from the northeast for the past 2 hours. Weather pattern suggests it'll shift to northwest around 1600 hours. I need to know if you can confirm that. Webb had followed him up. He checked his portable weather station, then looked up with surprise. She's right. Shift predicted. At 15:57, the woman nodded once, then began unpacking her rifle with movements, so practiced they looked like meditation. Nathan felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. You're planning to take a shot at 1-8 km. That's impossible. No. She fitted the rifle together, each piece clicking into place with precision. It's just very difficult. Lieutenant Chen joined them on the 8th floor, her expression skeptical. She'd been an instructor at sniper school before volunteering for field duty. She knew the mathematics of long-range shooting the way priests knew scripture. Captain, with all respect, this is, she looked at the woman, then at the distance to target, then back. This is beyond standard engagement parameters. I'm aware. Nathan kept his voice level. Sir, at that distance we're talking about. Chen pulled up ballistic software on her tablet. Wind drift alone could push the round 3 m off target. That's not accounting for temperature, humidity. The Coriolis effect, or a dozen other variables. And that's assuming the projectile remains stable through the entire flight, which at this distance and in these conditions, I understand the challenges. The woman's voice remained calm. Do you? Chen's professionalism cracked slightly because I've been teaching advanced marksmanship for 6 years, and what you're suggesting is theoretical. It's the kind of thing people argue about in classrooms. It's not. It's been done twice under controlled conditions with spotter teams and 3 times. The correction was soft. The third one wasn't in any classroom. Silence filled the frozen room. Webb checked his tablet, scrolling through classified briefings. Sir, I'm not finding any record of you wouldn't. Nathan studied the woman's face, seeing for the first time the faint lines around her eyes. The kind that came from staring through scopes in hard sunlight. The kind that suggested years and places that didn't make it into official records. Who sent you? People who knew you'd need someone to take a shot that doesn't officially exist. Chen shook her head. This is insane. At 1A calm, you're looking at a flight time of almost 3 seconds. 3 seconds during which the target could move. The wind could shift, thermal currents could alter the trajectory. So why? Because Captain Rivers has 43 people trapped in a kill zone, and in 90 minutes it'll be dark, and he won't have 43 people anymore. The woman looked at Nathan directly for the first time. Her eyes were gray, the color of winter sky. This is the only shot that might work, which means it has to work. Nathan moved to the window, studying the enemy position. He could see figures moving on the roof of the municipal building. Confident, relaxed. One of them was smoking. The orange glow of the cigarette visible even at this distance. 1-8 Kimem, he said quietly. Nobody shoots that far. Behind him, the woman began her preparations. They used to say, nobody ran a 4-minute mile. Her voice drifted across the room like snow. Then someone did, and then everyone knew it was possible. She moved alone. Nathan had offered an escort, but she'd refused with a shake of her head. Watching her disappear into the ruined city was like watching a ghost slip between worlds. Webb tracked her movement through thermal imaging as long as he could. She's using the cold zones, staying where her heat signature blends with ambient temperature. That's advanced fieldcraft. Nathan watched the blip on his screen fade. How advanced? The kind you don't learn in any school I know about. The woman navigated the dead city with the certainty of someone who'd been here before. She avoided the main streets where enemy drones might patrol. She moved through buildings, climbing through gaps in walls where conventional paths had collapsed. The hotel she chose rose 10 stories above the snowscape. Its upper floors exposed to the elements. It had been a luxury establishment once. Now it was just concrete and steel and the slow work of entropy. She climbed external fire escapes where ice had made the metal treacherous. She used rope where the stairs had given way entirely. On the 7th floor, she paused, studying a mark on the wall that might have been graffiti or might have been something else. Her gloved fingers traced it briefly. Then she kept climbing. The 9th floor had been a penthouse suite. Floor to ceiling, windows had let guests watch the city lights spread out below them like scattered jewels. Now the windows were gone and what remained was an open platform exposed to the killing wind. She set up her position in what had been a bedroom. Partial walls provided some protection from the elements, while still offering a clear sight line to the target. The rifle came out of its case like a precision instrument, which is exactly what it was. Custom barrel, modified trigger group, a scope that had been calibrated so many times, the adjustment marks were worn smooth. She didn't rush. Each component was checked, cleaned, fitted into place. The bipod was set, the rifle was positioned, the K-level verified. Every movement was deliberate, practiced to the point where thought and action had merged into something approaching instinct. When everything was ready, she finally allowed herself to look through the scope. 1-800M. The municipal building filled her view. She could see the enemy command post clearly. Now, 6 figures, the one in the center, wore better gear than the others, moved with authority. The commander, she watched him light another cigarette, watched the smoke get torn away by the wind, watched him check his watch and say something that made the others laugh. They felt safe. Behind her, in the shadows of the ruined hotel, frost had formed on the walls in patterns that looked almost deliberate. If someone had been there to look closely, they might have seen similar patterns from years ago, from the last time someone had used this position. But there was no one to look. Just the woman, her rifle, and the wind that carried old secrets. Colonel Victor Petro crushed out his cigarette and checked the rangefinder again. 1-800 mum. The American team was exactly where his intelligence had predicted they'd be. Trapped, surrounded, with nowhere to go, and no way to call for effective support in time. Beautiful work, he said to his deputy, a nervous young captain named Alex. We give them another hour, then move in during twilight, clean operation. Alex shifted uncomfortably. Sir, their sniper capabilities are irrelevant at this range. Victor laughed, gesturing at the open ground between their positions. Look at this distance. Look at this weather. What do you think they're going to do? Throw rocks around them. The command post hummed with confident activity. Radio operators coordinated the surrounding units. Heavy weapons crews checked their fields of fire. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Victor pulled out another cigarette, cupping his hands against the wind to light it. He'd been doing this for 20 years. Afghanistan. Chechnya, Syria. He knew the mathematics of violence. He knew exactly how far weapons could reach, how weather affected operations, how trapped enemies behaved when darkness came. Western snipers are overrated, he continued, warming to a familiar topic. All their fancy equipment, their endless training, and for what? So they can take shots at 600-700 number. We do that with iron sights. Yes, sir. Alexei didn't sound convinced. You worry too much. Victor exhaled smoke. That's why you're still a captain. You need to learn when you've won. And we've won. They have no artillery, no air support, no way to reach us. In 2 hours, this entire operation will be. He stopped. Alex had frozen, staring at something in the distance through binoculars. What movement? Top floor of the old hotel. 900 meters behind their position. Victor took the binoculars. The hotel was a wreck, barely standing. It took him a moment to find what Alex had seen. A shape barely visible against the snow-covered interior. One person, he said dismissively. Forward observer, maybe. Doesn't matter. They can watch all they want. At this distance, sir. Alex's voice had dropped. That's not 900 meters to the Americans. That's, Victor did the math in his head. Hotel to command post. Clear line of sight, approximately, he laughed. You think that's a sniper? Trying to shoot almost 200 in this weather. He clapped Alexei on the shoulder. Relax. Even if they have their best shooter over there, even if they have perfect equipment, the wind alone would make that shot pure fantasy. But Alex kept watching the hotel, his binoculars steady and far away. In a room that had once been a penthouse, a woman settled into her shooting position and began the calculations that would prove distance was a temporary safety at best. The numbers lived in her notebook, like prayers. She didn't use a ballistic computer. Those were for people who trusted machines more than they trusted themselves. She used paper, pencil, and decades of experience compressed into formulas that had been tested with blood. Wind at target 8 from northeast, gusting to 12. Wind at midpoint, she estimated 6 mi, steady wind at her position 10 feet, variable temperature opt Celsius, barometric pressure 123 mi-bars, distance 18 or 47 exactly, accounting for the angle and elevation difference. She wrote it all down in cramped handwriting that had gotten smaller over the years, as if trying to compress the chaos of ballistics into manageable symbols. The bullet would drop 11 mm over the course of its flight. 11 mm. That meant aiming at a point in empty air that existed only in theory, trusting that gravity and velocity would eventually intersect with the target's position. The wind would push the round laterally. At this distance, a 10 mph crosswind meant 12 feet of drift, but the wind wasn't constant. It changed with altitude, with temperature, with terrain features that created pockets of turbulence invisible to the naked eye. She'd have to account for that, all of it in her head. In the 3 seconds between pulling the trigger and the bullet arriving at its destination, then there was the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself. At this distance it mattered. Not much, maybe 6 in. But at 1 AQM 6 in was the difference between a hit and a miss that no one would ever explain. She closed her eyes, letting the numbers settle into something that felt more like intuition than mathematics. A memory surfaced. Unwanted but persistent training ground. Winter, instructor with frost in his beard. You can't calculate your way to a perfect shot. He'd said, the math gets you close, but at extreme range, you have to feel it. You have to know when the wind will hold, when the conditions align, and you have to take the shot before that moment passes. How do you know? She'd asked young then, still believing in certainty. You don't. You trust. She'd lost touch with that instructor years ago. Last she'd heard, he'd taken a contract in Africa and hadn't come back. The world consumed people like them steadily, efficiently, but his words remained. She opened her eyes and looked through the scope again. The commander was still there, still confident, still smoking, still laughing, with his men. She adjusted the elevation knob, clicked it 23 minutes of angle up. Each click represented a tiny change in trajectory, a slight alteration to where the bullet would eventually travel. Wind called for 8 minutes, right? But that was if the wind held steady. She dialed in 6, trusting that the variation would average out. Her breathing slowed. The wind was still wrong. It would shift in 17 minutes. She'd wait around her. The hotel creaked and settled. Snow found its way through gaps in the walls, creating small drifts in corners. The cold was absolute, the kind that made bones ache. She welcomed it. Cold meant clarity. Cold meant the air was dense, consistent. Cold meant fewer variables in an equation that already had too many. She checked her calculations again. Cross-referenced them with previous shots, previous conditions. Built a mental model of the bullets, path through space and time. 1 km 18 football fields more than a mile. A distance so absurd that most snipers would laugh at the suggestion. But she'd done absurd before, and she'd do it again. Because down below, 43 people were counting on an impossible shot from someone they didn't even know existed. She settled deeper into her position and waited for the wind to change. At 15 to 57, the wind shifted. She felt it before the instruments confirmed it. A change in pressure against her face. A slight alteration in how the snow moved past the broken windows. The wind had turned northwest. Steady at 7 miles. She adjusted her calculations. 5 minutes right, 24 minutes up. Her breathing settled into a rhythm that had taken years to develop. 4 seconds in, hold for 6, 8 seconds out. Between breaths, there was a moment of absolute stillness. That's where the shot lived. Through the scope, the target remained unchanged. The commander was giving orders now, pointing at a map spread across a makeshift table. 3 of his officers had gathered around him. Better. More targets meant more chaos after the shot. More confusion about where it had come from, what had happened, whether it was even real. She pressed her cheek against the stock, felt the cold metal through her balaclava. The rifle had become an extension of her body, as familiar as her own hands. Crosshairs settled on a point in space 18th above the commander's head. Not on him, above him. Trusting that gravity would pull the bullet down across that distance, that the wind would push it right, that every variable she'd accounted for would align in the 3 seconds the bullet needed to cross impossible distance. She waited for the next cycle of her breath. Inhale, hold. Everything slowed. She could hear her heartbeat, could feel it in her fingertips. Between beats there was a pause, a moment of perfect calm. That's when the world aligned. She pressed the trigger with steady pressure. No jerk, no anticipation, just a smooth increase of force until the sear released and the firing pin fell. The rifle punched into her shoulder. The sound rolled out across the frozen city like distant thunder, and the bullet began its 3-second journey through winter air. 1,800 miles is a long way for something so small. The bullet left the muzzle at 820 miles, spinning at 286,000 revolutions per minute. It crossed the first 100 miles before the sound of the shot had faded. At 200 miles, it began to feel the wind. Invisible currents pushed against it, trying to force it off course. The bullet held its path, spinning, fighting the air itself. At 400 miles, gravity started to win. The bullet began its inevitable descent, dropping faster with each meter traveled. What had been a flat trajectory became an arc, graceful and mathematical. 600 miles. The bullet passed through a thermal current rising from a burned-out building. For a fraction of a second, its path wavered. Then it stabilized, still spinning, still flying. At 900 miles, halfway through its flight, the bullet reached the apex of its arc. For one impossible moment, it seemed to hang in the air. Then gravity reasserted itself, and the bullet began to fall in earnest. 1,000 miles. The rotation was slowing slightly. The air resistance had taken its toll, but the bullet held together, held its course, driven by initial velocity and desperate mathematics. 200 miles. The Coriolis effect became visible. The Earth's rotation had moved the target slightly in the time since the shot was fired, but the shooter had accounted for this. The bullet and the target were converging on the same point in space and time. 500. The bullet was dropping fast now, wind blown and gravity pulled. It had lost half its initial velocity, but it was still flying, still deadly, still aimed at a point in space where a man would be. 700 mm. The bullet passed through a gust of wind that nearly pushed it off course. Nearly. It wobbled, corrected, kept flying. 800 mm. The bullet arrived at the target zone traveling at just over 400 miles, still supersonic, still lethal. Colonel Victor Petro never heard the shot. He was laughing at something Alex had said when the bullet struck him just below the left eye, traveling at a downward angle that the distance had created. The impact was catastrophic. He was dead before his body understood what had happened. For a moment, nobody moved. The other officers stared at their commander's body as if it were a magic trick they didn't understand. Alex's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Then someone screamed. The command post erupted into chaos. Men dove for cover. Radio operators abandoned their posts. Someone started shooting at random, spraying bullets at nothing. Where did it come from? Someone shouted in Russian. Where did it come from? Alexei pressed himself against a wall, his mind trying to process what he'd just seen. His commander had been standing right there, talking, laughing, and then he looked at the rangefinder, still sitting on the table, 800 mm, impossible. But the body on the ground said otherwise. In the ruined hotel, the woman had already chambered another round. The second shot came 40 seconds after the first. Captain Alexei had just found his voice, was just beginning to organize a response when the senior radio operator's head snapped back, and he collapsed without a sound. That's when the real panic started. These were experienced soldiers. They'd been under fire before, but this was different. They couldn't see the shooter, couldn't hear the shots, couldn't identify the direction of attack. Men simply died, struck down by invisible force. Alex grabbed his binoculars, scanning desperately. The American position. No, too far. The abandoned hotel that was almost 2 km away. No one could shoot that far, no one. A third shot punched through the radio equipment, showering sparks and shattered electronics across the command post. Not a kill shot this time. Tactical. Taking away their ability to coordinate. Return fire, someone shouted. At what? Their heavy weapons opened up. Anyway, raking the American positions with sustained bursts, wasting ammunition on targets that weren't the threat, creating noise and fury that accomplished nothing. Alex understood, then understood with terrible clarity. They weren't being attacked by a sniper. They were being dismantled by one. Nathan Rivers watched through his scope as the enemy position came apart. What the hell? Webb whispered beside him. They're shooting at us, but they don't know where she is. Nathan's voice was flat with awe. They think we're the threat. A fourth shot from the hotel. Another enemy soldier dropped. She's not going for maximum casualties, Chen observed. She's targeting command structure, taking out anyone who looks like they're trying to organize a defense. It was surgical, precise. Each shot chosen for maximum psychological impact rather than body count. The enemy formation fractured. Some soldiers broke and ran. Others huddled behind cover, refusing to move. A few tried to maintain discipline, but without clear orders. Without knowing where the threat was coming from, their efforts dissolved into confusion. Nathan keyed his radio. All units, prepare to move. We've got a window. Sir, are we just gonna leave her? Webb asked. Nathan looked at the hotel, dark and silent against the white sky. Something tells me she doesn't need our help getting out. His team moved fast, taking advantage of the chaos to extract from the kill zone. The enemy fired sporadically, but their hearts weren't in it anymore. They'd learned that distance wasn't protection, that their fortress of range had walls made of assumption. By the time Nathan's team reached the rally point, 6 kilometers from the engagement zone, the enemy position had been completely abandoned. 188 kilometers had become nowhere to hide. The debrief happened in a forward operating base that smelled of diesel fuel and cold coffee. Nathan stood in front of a classified terminal, scrolling through files that shouldn't exist. Beside him, Major Rebecca Stone from intelligence watched with the expression of someone revealing information against her better judgment. You're not going to find much, Stone said. I need to know who saved my team. I understand. But she gestured at the screen where most of the text had been redacted into black bars. What you're looking at is someone who officially doesn't exist anymore. Nathan, read what little remained visible. Service dates that jumped across decades. Deployment locations that were blanked out. A code name that had been used once then retired. Winter. She was active during Stone. Checked her own notes. 3 different conflicts. Always in extreme conditions. Always at extreme ranges. Her confirmed kills are classified, but the number is significant. Why is her file locked? Because 6 years ago she walked away. Stone pulled up another document. This one stamped with so many classification marks, it was barely readable. After a particular operation, the details are restricted, but the result was that an entire insurgent leadership was eliminated in the span of 4 hours from positions they believed were secure. Nathan felt something cold trace down his spine. Positions like ours today, exactly like yours today. Stone closed the file. After that operation she submitted a request to be reassigned. When it was denied, she disappeared. No contact, no location. For 6 years nobody knew where she was. Until today, until someone at a very high level made a phone call and asked if she was willing to come back just for one shot. Stone met his eyes just to prove that it was still possible. Webb had been listening from the doorway. Sir, the weapon she was using, I ran the serial numbers through our database. That rifle was reported destroyed in a helicopter crash in 2019. Reported destroyed, Stone emphasized, but clearly not. Nathan looked at the screen again, at the fragments of a career that had been deliberately erased, at the spaces between the black bars where a person's life should have been. Where is she now? Unknown. She left the hotel before your extraction. No contact, no communication, just gone. Chen appeared beside Webb. I found something. An after-action report from 2018 mentions a sniper who ended a hostage situation by taking a shot through a window from. She paused, rechecking the number from 2-100. In win through glass. That's impossible, Webb said automatically. Chen showed him the report. That's what the insurgents thought too. Nathan turned away from the terminal. Outside the base, snow was falling again, covering tracks, erasing evidence. Somewhere out there, a woman with a rifle was disappearing into a world that had mostly forgotten she existed. She saved 43 lives today, he said quietly. And we don't even know her real name. Stone's expression softened slightly. That's how she wants it. People like her don't do this for recognition. They do it because someone has to. Because there are shots that need to be taken, and they're the only ones who can take them. Nathan nodded slowly. He understood duty. Understood sacrifice. But this was something else. This was someone who had become a ghost in order to remain effective, who had traded identity for capability. If she ever needs anything, he started. She won't ask, Stone interrupted. That's not who she is. The terminal screen went dark, taking with it the fragments of a story that would never be fully told. In the corner of the room, someone had left a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Nathan picked it up, felt the ceramic chill against his palm. Like everything else about today, it was a reminder that cold was its own kind of strength. She cleaned the rifle in a safe house 30 kilometers from the engagement zone. The process was methodical, almost ritual. Disassembly, cleaning, inspection, reassembly. Each component examined for wear, for stress, for any sign that the weapon had reached the end of its reliable life. The rifle had performed flawlessly, as it always did, because she wouldn't accept anything less. Outside night had fallen. The safe house was barely that abandoned farm building with 3 walls and a roof that mostly kept out the snow. But it was off any map, off any route, and that made it perfect. She worked by the light of a single chemical glow stick, her hands steady despite the cold. Other people collected medals, combinations, records of service. She collected distances 600 meb in Yemen. 1 shot, 1 kill. Target acquired and eliminated before his guards understood the danger. 900 meters in Afghanistan, mountain warfare. Thin air that changed all the calculations. She'd adapted. The target hadn't. 200 mem in Syria, urban environment. Wind channeling through streets in unpredictable patterns. She'd waited 6 hours for the conditions to align. Then she'd waited another 3, because the shot wasn't quite right. When she finally pulled the trigger, the conditions had been perfect for exactly 8 seconds. She'd needed 4 of them. Each distance was a lesson. Each shot carried forward into the next, building a library of knowledge that existed only in her mind, her muscles, her instincts. 800 maybe today. Tomorrow somewhere else it might be 2,000. The rifle went back into its case. The brass from today's shots went into a bag that would be disposed of in a river 20 km from here. No evidence, no trace, no story for someone to piece together. Later she'd learned that lesson early. The moment you left a trail was the moment you became vulnerable. A memory surfaced. Different time, different place, but the same cold mission in mountains. Target was a warlord who'd been terrorizing villages. Intelligence said he was untouchable, protected by distance and terrain. She'd climbed for 3 days to reach the shooting position. Another 2 days waiting for weather. The shot, when it finally came, had been through a window across a valley, accounting for altitude that made the air thin and unpredictable. The bullet had flown for 2 seconds. When it arrived, an entire region exhaled. She'd climbed back down the mountain alone, carrying a rifle that had just freed thousands of people. Nobody had thanked her. Nobody had known she was there. That was the price. Not the cold or the isolation or the danger. The price was being the answer to a problem that officially didn't exist. Being the solution that couldn't be acknowledged, saving lives that would never know they'd been saved. She stood shouldering her pack. The rifle case went across her back. Outside, fresh snow was already covering her tracks from earlier. Tomorrow she'd be someone else, somewhere else. The name she'd used today would be retired. The identity would fragment, disperse, become unusable until the next call came, until someone needed a shot that couldn't be taken. Until winter needed to choose a side again. She walked out into the falling snow, and within 50 m it was as if she'd never been there at all. 4 months later, the city was still abandoned. The war had moved on, leaving behind the usual debris of human conflict. Burned vehicles, collapsed buildings, unexploded ordnance, waiting patiently for someone careless. But something had changed in the calculations of the forces that operated here. 8 kilometers was no longer considered safe distance. It showed up in operational planning, in the way commanders positioned their units, in the nervous ways soldiers scanned distant buildings even when logic said no threat could reach them. A legend had taken root the way legends do in military. Circles passed from unit to unit, embellished with each telling the story of a shot that shouldn't have been possible, of a commander who died believing he was safe, of a team that had been saved by someone who didn't exist. In officer training courses, instructors now use the engagement as a case study, not in the official curriculum that would require acknowledging too much, but in the informal sessions where veterans shared real lessons. Distance is a factor, not a guarantee, they'd say. Don't ever forget that. The hotel where the shot had been taken became a landmark. Units avoided it. Something about the place felt wrong, as if the building itself remembered what had happened there. Sometimes soldiers on patrol would look up at the 9th floor and wonder if someone was watching them through a scope right now. The rational part of their mind said no. The part that had seen impossible things happen said maybe. Winter returned to the region. Snow covered the streets again, making the city look almost peaceful in its abandonment. On the 9th floor of the hotel, frost formed patterns on the walls. They looked random, the way frost usually does, but if someone studied them carefully, they might see that some patterns repeated, that they'd been there before, that they might be there again. In a different city, in a different country, a woman waited at a cafe. She looked like anyone else. Tourist clothes, camera around her neck, the kind of person you'd see and forget immediately. Her phone vibrated once. A message appeared, then disappeared. She paid for her coffee with cash, left no tip, walked out into a street crowded with people who didn't know and wouldn't care that the person passing them had changed the outcome of a battle 4 months ago. In her bag, carefully packed and innocuous, the components of a rifle waited. Different configuration this time, different caliber, different purpose, but the same fundamental truth. That distance was just mathematics. And mathematics could be overcome by someone with enough skill, enough patience, enough willingness to become a ghost in service of necessity. She boarded a bus heading toward the mountains. The scenery outside was beautiful. Snow-capped peaks, villages clinging to hillsides. The kind of place that looked peaceful if you didn't know what to look for. She knew what to look for. Somewhere up there, a target was living, under the assumption that altitude made them safe, that terrain made them unreachable, that the thin air at 3 Zalozen meant no shot could be accurate. They were wrong. They just didn't know it yet. The bus climbed higher, following roads that switched back and forth across the mountainside. Other passengers talked quietly, took photos, enjoyed the journey. She sat in the back and calculated bullet drop at altitude. By the time they reached the mountain village, she had her answer. Winter came and went. Years passed. The woman remained a myth. A story told in bars and briefing rooms. The sniper who could shoot farther than anyone thought possible. Who appeared when needed and vanished when finished. Who had no name, no face, no history anyone could verify. Some people said she was multiple people, that no single person could do the things attributed to her, that the legend had grown beyond reality. Others said she was retired, that after enough shots, enough distances, enough victories, she'd finally walked away for good. A few said she was dead, that someone like her couldn't last forever, that eventually distance would fail her the way it had failed so many targets. None of them were quite right. The truth was simpler and more complicated than any legend. She was out there still, taking shots, still proving that mathematics could overcome assumptions, still being the answer to problems that required exact violence delivered from impossible distances. The rifle had been rebuilt twice, new barrel, new stock. So many parts replaced that it might be argued it wasn't the same weapon anymore. But she knew different. The rifle was the same because she was the same, because the math was the same, because somewhere someone needed a shot that couldn't be taken, and she was the one who would take it. In a small workshop in a forgotten town, she made final adjustments to a new scope. Tomorrow she'd travel to a border region where tensions were escalating, where a shot from two kabutis might prevent a war or might not. The outcome was never guaranteed. She knew that better than anyone. But the shot itself, that was guaranteed because she'd done the math, checked the calculations, accounted for every variable that could be accounted for. And when the moment came, she'd trust her training, her instinct, her decades of experience compressed into 3 seconds of flight time. Outside, snow began to fall. The first snow of a new winter. She watched it accumulate on the windowsill, each flake adding to the growing total. Mathematics made visible. Chaos creating order through repetition. That's what she was in a way. Individual shots that added up to something larger. Chaos constrained by calculation. Winter given purpose and direction. She cleaned her tools and prepared for tomorrow. The wind outside carried the sound of distant voices. People living their lives unaware that someone nearby spent her days calculating how to kill from distances they couldn't imagine. That was fine. That was the point. They didn't need to know. They just needed to be safe. And sometimes safety required someone willing to take a shot that statistics said should fail. The snow fell faster, covering the ground in white. By morning, there would be no tracks, no evidence that anyone had been here. Just another empty workshop in another forgotten town. But somewhere else, at some impossible distance, a target would never see the shot that ended their threat. And the world would turn and winter would choose its side again, and the mathematics of violence would prove one more time that nothing is truly out of range. Not if you're willing to do the math. Not if you're willing to wait for the wind. Not if you're willing to become the shot itself. The woman closed her notebook and packed her gear. Tomorrow would bring its own calculations, its own impossible distances, its own proof that safety is just another comfortable lie people tell themselves until someone proves them wrong. From 1-800 meters away.